The year was 1996. John, a young American in his early 20s, was backpacking across Morocco with two friends. They found themselves captivated by the vibrant energy of Marrakesh. The sights, sounds, and smells of the marketplace were a sensory overload. Stalls overflowed with colorful textiles, spices perfumed the air, and the constant hum of vendors hawking their wares was almost hypnotic. John and his friends, captivated by the exotic atmosphere, wandered deeper into the labyrinthine marketplace. The sun beat down on the bustling marketplace. The air buzzed with the sound of bartering and laughter. John and his friends, David and Mark, were like kids in a candy store. They moved from stall to stall, their senses overwhelmed by the sights, sounds, and smells of Morocco. The aroma of spices, the vibrant colors of hand-woven rugs, and the rhythmic chanting of shopkeepers created an intoxicating atmosphere. It was an adventure unlike any they had experienced before. The alley narrowed, the buildings on either side seeming to lean inwards, as if trying to engulf the small patch of sky above. The shops here were different, darker, their wares hidden behind heavy drapes. John, David, and Mark stuck close together, their earlier exuberance replaced by a cautious silence. It was then that they noticed him. Leaning against the wall of a dimly lit shop, almost camouflaged by the shadows, was a tall, imposing figure. He was dressed in traditional Moroccan robes, a jalaba, but his bearing spoke of an air of authority that set him apart from the shopkeepers they'd encountered so far. He watched them approach with an unreadable expression on his face, his dark eyes seeming to pierce through them. John's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure why, but the man's intense gaze made him uneasy. The man was tall, easily towering over John and his friends. His face was weathered and creased, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He wore a traditional jalaba, but it was of a finer quality than any John had seen before. A sense of foreboding settled over John, heavy and suffocating. As they drew closer, the man straightened up, his gaze lingering on John for a moment longer than was comfortable. A slow smile spread across his face, revealing a set of surprisingly white teeth that seemed to gleam in the dim light. He spoke to them in heavily accented English, his voice smooth and surprisingly deep. "Welcome, travelers. Can I interest you in something unique?" John and his friends exchanged uneasy glances. The man's words, though seemingly innocuous, hung in the air with an unsettling weight. John, ever the cautious one, shook his head politely. "Thank you, but we're just looking around." The tall man chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to reverberate off the walls of the narrow alleyway. Of course, just looking around. But surely, my friends, you must be curious. I have something very special to offer." He gestured towards the darkened interior of the shop behind him. Something valuable. John felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't like the way the man kept looking at them, like a predator sizing up its prey. He tried to edge past, pulling his friends with him. "We should really be going," he muttered, his voice tight with apprehension. The tall man, however, didn't budge. Instead, he stepped closer, his smile fading into a thin, hard line. "Not so fast, my young friend," he said, his voice taking on a steely edge. "I believe we have business to discuss." He reached out and placed a heavy hand on John's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "I'm interested in buying your friend." John froze, his blood turning to ice. "What?" he stammered, his mind struggling to process the man's words. David and Mark, initially amused by the encounter, sobered instantly. The playful banter died in their throats, replaced by a growing sense of dread. This was no longer a harmless encounter with a colorful local. The atmosphere had shifted, the air thick with a palpable tension. The tall man chuckled again, but this time it was devoid of any warmth. "You heard me, boy. I'm willing to pay a good price for him. He is young, strong, valuable." He tightened his grip on John's arm, his fingers digging into his flesh. "What do you say? It's a generous offer." John's mind reeled. Was this man serious? Was he actually talking about buying him? It was absurd, unthinkable. John tried to pull away, but the man's grip was like iron. "This isn't funny," he said, his voice tight with fear. "Let go of me." The tall man's face hardened. "You misunderstand," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "This is not a joke. I am a man of my word, and I am offering you a fortune." He leaned closer, his breath hot on John's cheek. "Do not insult me by refusing." Section 5. Panic and Flight. John's heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence of the alleyway. The man's grip tightened, his fingers digging into John's arm like talons. Fear, raw and primal, surged through him, drowning out all rational thought. "No!" John cried out, his voice cracking with panic. "Get off me!" He wrenched his arm free with a desperate surge of adrenaline, stumbling back into David and Mark. The tall man's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint in their depths. "You are making a mistake," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "A grave mistake." He reached into the folds of his robe, his hand disappearing into the darkness. For a split second, everything seemed to move in slow motion. John's breath caught in his throat, his eyes fixed on the man's hand as it emerged from his robe. In his hand, gleaming under the weak light of the alleyway, was a knife. Its blade was long and wickedly curved, catching the light as the man flicked his wrist, testing its sharpness. "Run!" David screamed, his voice shrill with terror. John didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted, his legs pumping furiously, his lungs burning with exertion. David and Mark were right behind him, their own fear lending speed to their flight. Section 6. The Chase. The narrow alleyway became a blur of shadows and light as they fled, the sound of their own ragged breaths echoing off the walls. The tall man's enraged shouts followed them, each syllable laced with fury and a chilling promise of violence. John's heart pounded in his chest, his legs burning with exertion. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The tall man was closing the distance, his long strides eating up the ground with terrifying speed. The knife glinted in his hand, a menacing beacon in the gloom. "Faster!" David gasped, his face contorted with effort. John pushed himself harder, his legs screaming in protest. The alley twisted and turned, each turn offering a fleeting hope of escape, only to be dashed as the tall man's heavy footsteps continued to pound behind them. The air was thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and fear. Ahead, John spotted a glimmer of light. "This way!" he shouted, veering sharply towards the left. They burst out of the alleyway into a wider street, the sudden influx of light momentarily blinding. Section 7. Finding Refuge. The street was a hive of activity, crowded with people going about their daily business. The cacophony of sound, the shouts of vendors, the blaring horns of taxis, the rhythmic chanting of beggars, washed over John, a welcome assault on his senses after the oppressive silence of the alleyway. John, David, and Mark didn't slow down, their chests heaving, their legs burning. They weaved through the crowd, dodging startled pedestrians, their pursuer hot on their heels. People shouted at them in Arabic, their words unintelligible, but their annoyance evident. Spotting a small cafe, John veered towards it, his friends close behind. They stumbled through the entrance, the relative cool and dimness of the interior washing over them like a wave. Gasping for breath, they collapsed onto a vacant bench, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The cafe owner, a small, wiry man with a bushy mustache, eyed them with suspicion. "What is going on here?" he demanded in broken English. John, still struggling to catch his breath, could only manage to stammer out, "Man, knife, chasing us." The cafe owner, his eyes widening in alarm, ushered them towards the back of the cafe, concealing them from view behind a heavy curtain. He then moved to the front of the cafe, his gaze scanning the street outside. Section 8. Cultural Divide. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The adrenaline slowly leached out of John's system, leaving him weak and shaky. He huddled with David and Mark, their fear giving way to a stunned silence. They were safe for now, but the encounter in the alleyway had left an indelible mark on their souls. The cafe owner returned, his face grim. "He is gone," he said. "But be careful, this is not a place to be careless." He looked at them with a mixture of pity and something akin to disapproval. "You were foolish to go into that alleyway." John, still shaken, managed to ask, "Why? What was that all about?" The cafe owner sighed, running a hand through his thick mustache. "That man," he said, his voice low, "he was a slave trader. Or at least he used to be. It is not as common now, but it still happens." John stared at him in disbelief. "Slave trader?" he repeated, the words catching in his throat. "He was serious? He wanted to buy me?" The cafe owner nodded slowly. "Yes, it is a different world here, my friend. Things are not always what they seem." Section 9. A lasting impression. John left the cafe that day a changed person. The encounter in the alleyway, the sheer terror of that moment, had stripped away his naivety, replacing it with a chilling understanding of the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of even the most vibrant and exotic places. The experience in Morocco stayed with John long after he returned home. It served as a constant reminder that the world was a complex and often dangerous place, where cultural norms could be vastly different, And what seemed unthinkable in one part of the world could be a stark reality in another. The bustling marketplace, the intoxicating scents, the vibrant colors, they all remained etched in his memory, but now they were tinged with a sobering awareness of the darker side of human nature. He had glimpsed a world he never knew existed, a world where human life could be bought and sold like a commodity. It was a truth he couldn't unsee, a burden he would carry with him all